into space like a spaceship, come back and land more or less like a conventional airplane. Inside the cockpit, over 2,500 switches and gauges in that initial cockpit. Now, two different versions of the cockpit that are up here. This is the cockpit that I trained and flew in. You can see 3 computer screens. Now, to put this in perspective, you got to remember the shuttle was actually on the drawing boards in the early 1970s. So anybody that knows anything about aviation takes a look at that cockpit and says, that looks like old technology. Well, you're absolutely right. It is old technology. 3 computer screens and a lot more hardwired switches and gauges. But again, incredible complexity, 2,500 to 3,000 switches and gauges. You not only had to know how those switches and gauges worked when everything was going right, but think about it. You got 2.5 million parts operating all at the same time. What do you think the odds of a failure are? Very, very high. We did upgrade that cockpit in the 1990s, took out some of those hardwired switches and gauges and replaced them with more computer screens or multifunction displays, as NASA prefers to call them. Kind of good news and bad news. The good news was it gave us more information to work with. Bad news was it gave us more information to work with. It only got more complex inside the cockpit. So hundreds and hundreds of hours in there, again, not only learning how to fly the vehicle when everything was going right, but when things started to go wrong, you had to be prepared to deal with it. I talk about flying the vehicle, and whether you ever realize it about the shuttle or not, we actually rarely flew the vehicle. For the most part, the computers were doing the flying for us. That was a little scary. Now, some of the older adults in the room may remember what computer technology was like in the 1970s. Anybody out there have a Commodore 64? That was about it. That was what we had, and that was what was responsible for doing the flight. So when we lift off 5 million pound craft, 7 million pounds of force, accelerating to 3 times the force of gravity on our way to the 200-mile Earth orbit, the computers are doing the flying for us. But we maxed out the computers doing that flying task, so all the other responses, the emergency procedures and all that, were the responsibility of the crew. So hundreds and hundreds of hours inside that cockpit, not only again learning how things work when everything was going right, but fully prepared to take over if we had a number of emergencies, including computer failure, we could take over and fly manually. So lots and lots of time in there, not only learning about all the technical things, but also the teamwork, the coordination, the communication that goes along with that. So incredible complexity inside that cockpit. And sure enough, both my flights, we did have emergencies during that ascent phase, the most dangerous part of the mission, and the responsibility to identify a problem, confirm it with mission control in Houston, and then take the emergency action to bring the backup system up was part of the training. Now, I got to do one of the more unique parts of training for spaceflight, doing a spacewalk or EVA, extravehicular activity. This is probably the most physically demanding part of my training. About 15% of the cadre goes through the spacewalk training. What makes it so physically demanding? The suit you see me getting into here weighs about 300 pounds. Incredibly difficult. Why? Well, think about it. When you're up there, you're flown into space now, you're on orbit in the space shuttle, something requires you, either a planned EVA or an emergency situation requires you to go outside the shuttle into the vacuum space, temperatures that range from plus 300 to minus 300 degrees Fahrenheit, and to do up to 8 hours of useful work out there. Very, very hostile environment. That suit has to be able to not only keep you alive, but allow you to do that work out there. So incredibly complex. We train for that in what we call our neutral buoyancy laboratory, using the neutral buoyancy of water to simulate the effects of weightlessness. So we get suited up just exactly the way it would be on orbit. You can see supported by that cage in the background. 2 of us working as a team, get put into the water, get neutrally buoyant in the water. It's a simulation of the effects of weightlessness. So you're not truly weightless, and boy, if you really want to know that for sure, when you're in the water tank, they recommend you try working upside down for a while, just to get used to that orientation. Try standing on your head for 30 minutes sometime. It's a little bit bothersome after a while. Interesting enough, the actual spacewalk is easier. Why would that be? You're weightless. In the tank, you've got 300 pounds weight and mass. When you go into space, no weight, you're 300 pounds mass, but weightless up there. So the actual spacewalk itself was a bit easier. Now, I talked a little bit about the one time we do take over and fly the shuttle manually. It's during the landing phase. We do have an autopilot on board, so the computer is capable of landing the shuttle. We have never fully trusted. There's a variety of reasons of why that was true. But because we trusted, we would usually take over starting about 30,000 feet and fly the shuttle manually